Hi guys, and welcome to another video. In this video we're going to be going over the usage and meta breakdown guide for swords. It's our first one of weapons. I'm really looking forward to it, and let's get straight in. So over this we're going to go through the passives and abilities on each sword, different usages for the that's not a word, different uses, that's the one, and yeah, basically we'll just go through that. I'm going to use the elders again just as a sort of placeholder to look at, just because they have all the passives and all the abilities on. So first of all, we're going to go over the passives. Deep cuts. Every 4 normal attacks you inflict a bleeding on the enemy. This deals an additional 55 per second for 1.5 seconds. So it does actually do a half tick on the half second. So it actually does about sort of 70-ish damage, just over. But this requires getting 4 auto attacks within something like, I think it's like 4.5 seconds. It's pretty hard to hit on someone that's going to be kiting you, and a lot of people are going to kite you as a sword, so I don't recommend this at all. I don't think it's very good. Secondly, we have temporary threat bonus. Your threat generation is increased by 300% for 1 second. That is purely tank. If you tank, that's what you use. If you're not tank, you don't use it. Obviously it's useless in PvP either way. Life leech. Every normal attack you restore 9 health. Pretty good for just a general amount of sustain. More PvE than PvP, I think, but it's something. It might be worth using in PvP. And then every 5 normal attacks, your resistances are increased by 68 for 2 seconds. So it's harder, even harder to hit than the deep cuts. However, you can, if you do get it, it's going to be a serious increase to your defense. So I would potentially run with this one in endgame, and deep cuts maybe for PvP to start off with. But it is, I just think the passives on swords are a bit lackluster at the moment. I don't think they're great. So we're going to go over the Q and Ws, which are the same on all the swords. Go away. Heroic Strike deals 256 damage. Obviously this is relevant to the item power. Also applies a heroic charge on you. Each charge increases your move speed by 10% for 6 seconds and stacks up to 3 times. Does a fair bit of damage considering relatively low energy cost and low cooldown as well. So it's obviously a spam ability. And then you've got Heroic Cleave. Does it basically the same thing, just slightly less damage, but in a AoE around the target. Does 199 base damage, so that's like 60 less, yeah, around that, to the target and all enemies in close proximity. I'd pretty much always use the strike, because you're going to want that single target damage come fights, basically. First thing we've got, interrupts enemy spellcasting and deals 255 physical damage. Additionally, your normal attack damage is increased by 20% for 5 seconds for each heroic charge on you. So 60% is obviously the max. It's important to note it doesn't actually consume the heroic charge. So if I have three stacks of that and I use interrupt, it doesn't actually consume the charge, and therefore still got 30% speed increase and then 60% auto attack damage increase. That's definitely when you want to be trying to get some auto attacks in. Pretty strong, but it's a bit of a weird one in that you want to be saving interrupt for important spell casts, and you also want to use it as a DPS cooldown. It's a bit of a weird one. It's also quite a high energy cost as well. You've then got Iron Will. Increases your move speed by 20% and incoming damage is reduced by 25% for 5 seconds. So there's a couple of swords we'll go into later on that are basically you go in, do big AoE damage and then leave, and that's kind of your whole combo. Iron Will is perfect for this, because you run in, you pop your like E, or you pop this just before, pop your E and then run out, and you're completely safe during the whole period. If you were to do it without, you could get snared, you could get basically just focus targeted, and it would make it a lot harder. Iron Will is definitely the one I recommend for GVG fighting and Hellgate fighting if you're using another of the 2 weapons that I'll show later. You then got Hamstring. Instantly slows the target enemy for 38% for 16.42 seconds. That's a really long slow, and deals 198 physical damage. Again, high energy cost, but basically I'm trying to think what the Hamstring would be in PvP. It's likely to be around 8-9 seconds. Therefore, the cooldown, you basically can almost keep a perma hamstring up. in PvP on someone, which is really, really strong. And then we have the Broadsword. Interrupts enemy spellcasting and deals physical damage to an enemy. Damage scales depending on the number of heroic charges active on you. All heroic charges will be consumed on hit. Additionally, your resistances are increased by 107 for 3 seconds. Then obviously you can see the damage as it's listed. The energy cost is again quite high, but it would be for a finisher. It's on a very low cooldown. So if you're using Broadsword, this is the one-handed sword. I recommend using this with a sarcophagus if you're going to use it in PvP. Your whole job is to interrupt. You basically run with these 3 and you sit on a healer if they are holy. And so it only works on a holy healer if you're going to sit on a healer. If not, sit on a DPS and just interrupt every cast they do. You literally could do like W, let them get a cast off, E, let them get a cast off, get close to her W coming back up again. You basically can just chain them together to interrupt a lot of casts, and you'll do a fairly decent amount of damage as well. You're not going to do anything game breaking. Again, broadswords are underrated. They don't get seen in PvP, and I think they are something that could potentially work. But it does mean being in the front line all the time, which is why I recommend the sarcophagus. So next one we have, I'm actually going to go and do the base ones first. So we've got dual swords. So obviously everything else is the same. The only thing I'm going to go over differently is the E. Deals physical damage to all enemies around you in 4 meter radius. An additional 3% of the enemy's max health will be dealt as direct damage only against players. The damage scales depending on the number of heroic charges active on you and consumes all your heroic charges. So again, the damage is slightly less than the broadsword. However, on players you would get the extra 3% max health damage, and it also is going to cleave everything around you. It's on a slightly longer cooldown with a big energy cost, but very, very strong. So this is the playstyle that I would run with, like Heroic Strike to build up your charges, Iron Will to run in and then E everything, and then have Iron Will still on you to run out. Effectively you go in, do a big chunk of damage and leave, rebuild stacks and do the same thing. You basically just go in and do damage every sort of 6 to 10 seconds. It's pretty strong, but yeah. I recommend these if you don't want to use an artifact. I think these are a slightly worse version of the Claret Blade, which we'll go over in a minute. But it's kind of people's opinion. I actually prefer these at some times because it also deals damage to tanks quite well. But we'll go over the Claret Blade later and I'll show you why I prefer that one at times. You've then got the Claymore. So Claymore. Charge towards an enemy, dealing 617 damage and temporarily pinning them to the spot. The length of the enemy route depends on the number of heroic charges on you. Interesting to know, this doesn't actually consume heroic charge stacks, which means you can keep permanent 30% move speed with this build. And obviously you can then get a really long route, so you can get a 7.29 second route. And yeah, you can do a fair bit of damage. So Claymores are used as ganking weapons. They're kind of a slightly worse version of the quarterstaff. And if you're doing this for its intended role, which is solo ganking, I believe, it's Heroic Strike, Hamstring, because you keep the perma slow on them, and Charge. And effectively you just become a CC bot. You have a 30% move speed at all times, you have Hamstring to keep them slowed, and then you have a route for when they're getting away. It's really, really strong. Does a lot of damage as well. So we're going to move into Claret Blade, which is the tier 1 artifact that you can get from basically all bosses at like the second tier of boss. And again, everything stays the same except for the E. Deals physical damage to all enemies around you in a 6 meter radius. Damage scales depending on the number of heroic charges active on you and consumes all your heroic charges. So it does slightly more damage than the dual swords. Let's actually just have a look. So it's 850 for the 3 charges. That's 790, so it's 60 more damage, but then again, dual swords has the 3% max health. Claret Blade, however, does have a bigger radius, which means they've got more opportunity to go in and cleave their whole team for a big chunk of damage. Does more against squishies, less against tanks, and I think that's the important part with Claret Blade. The other thing is Claret Blade is also one hand. Therefore you could actually have a sarcophagus, and that gives you a lot more tankiness. It makes you a lot harder to kill, especially running the Iron Will. You could also run a Mist Caller if you wanted to speed that combo up. There's a couple of different things you could do with a Clarent Blade to make yourself do more, whether it's more tankiness, more DPS, anything. So I think Clarent Blade's definitely the one to be using at the moment. I know it's on the radar for a nerf, and understandably it is very, very strong at the moment. But yeah. So I'm going to go into the last one, which is the the Hell artifact for swords, which is Carving Sword. These things look amazing, by the way. And then we've got dash towards a location, strike all enemies on the way, dealing 649 damage to each enemy and slowing them. So this doesn't consume your heroic charge. Again, I think this is supposed to be just a better Claymore that's kind of failed in fairness. So it does a lot of damage base, a very high energy cost on this, Jesus. But the problem is diminishing returns is a thing in this game. It's why eventually stuns on someone through like a quarterstaff just get really, really short. So if you're running Fearless Strike for the slow and then Hamstring, it's going to defeat each other down. And I think that's kind of why this doesn't work so much. I think the root's just flat out better, to be honest. This is a bit of an underwhelming Hell artifact. But yes, guys, so swords, you've got 3 swords that are kind of GVG Hellgate focused, which are the bottom 3 here: Dual Swords, Clarent Blade and Broadsword. And they're tiered: Clarent Blade, Dual Swords and then Broadsword, I believe. Broadsword does a slightly different job. It depends what you're looking for from it. Then you've got the Claymore and Carving Sword for ganking. I think Claymore's just flat out better in that situation. Anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this first weapon meta breakdown. Hope it helps. Any questions, comments, anything, stick it down below and I'll try and get around to them. Like, subscribe, check out my Twitch channel. Other than that, guys, have a good day. Catch you later.